Welcome to the Homemaking Missionary on Radio Ngjallja. I pray that you are healthy and well during this difficult time. I'm glad to continue once again stories of super saints our children can emulate. 4 weeks ago I shared with you how much Moses likes cartoons, especially the PJ Masks. Whenever he wants to pretend play, it almost always revolves around him being a superhero, most of the time Catboy. He has a lot of fun playing these games and of course watching the show. But as we continue our time of fasting and preparation for Pascha, I want to make sure that he is focused on Christ. An idea I had was to share with him every week 2 saints that are super and lived a life that we can learn from. Now I want to share that I'm not saying that saints are superheroes who are different and not human. Rather, they're models of how to live a life with Christ at the center, heroes of our faith, and super in their love for Christ. Instead of my sons only hearing about these fake superheroes in movies and cartoons, I want them also to hear about the super saints that we have in our real Orthodox Christian faith. In addition to sharing these stories with you, I invite your whole family to listen in and learn about super saints that we can emulate. Each saint will have a specific trait that we can learn from them and put into use in our own lives. The 2 saints that we will talk about today are Saint George and Saint Irene Cristovalantou. Moses really likes the story of Saint George, first because he was born on Saint George Day, and second, because he loves the idea of a strong dragon-slaying soldier. I have found a few stories online about Saint George, and here is a compilation of them all. The holy, glorious, and right victorious great martyr and trophy bearer Saint George was a Christian Roman soldier. According to his story, he was born to a Christian family in the late 3rd century. His father was from Cappadocia and served as an officer in the army. His mother was from Lydda in Palestine. She returned to her city after her husband died with her young son, where she made sure that he had a good education and he was raised in the faith. When Saint George got a little bit older, he followed his father's example and joined the army. In 303, Diocletian issued an edict authorizing all of the Christians to be persecuted in the Roman Empire. George was supposed to take part in this persecution as a soldier, but instead, he said that he was a Christian himself, and he began to tell the emperor the things that he had done wrong. This was when Saint George was martyred. Saint George is often depicted in his icon with a dragon under his feet. This comes from a legend whose details sometimes vary according to local tradition. The tale begins 1,700 years ago in the time of the Roman Empire. There was just outside the city of Cyrene in North Africa a large, stagnant, smelly pond. In this pond lived a dragon, and whenever the dragon breathed on a person or an animal, they died. At first, the dragon breathed on all the sheep that lived in the fields around the city. Then, he started to attack the people. The people of Cyrene had no choice but to come to terms with the dragon. They agreed to give him 1 person a month, so long as he left everybody else alone. But how were they to decide which person would be fed to the dragon? The king made a rule that all the names of the people in the city will be written down and kept in a giant box. Each month, one of the names would be taken out, and that person would be given to the dragon. In this way, men and women, both rich and poor, were to be fed to this evil beast. Then one day, the name of the princess was taken out. According to the king's own laws, he had to sacrifice his daughter. But instead he called all the people of the city together, and he was offering them gold and treasures, because he did not want his daughter to go to the dragon. The judges who oversaw this lottery said that it has to be fair, or no one would do it anymore. And so the king said to his daughter, "My dear, my princess. I will never see your wedding day." A week went past and the day arrived when the princess was supposed to meet her fate. The palace servants dressed her in her wedding gown and put a crown of flowers on her head. They led her out of the city and headed to the lake where the dragon lived. As they were on their way, a Roman soldier came on his horse up to the city. His name was George, and he was a Christian from Cappadocia. George stopped and asked why such a beautiful young woman was looking so sad on her wedding day. Someone told him, because according to the law, she has to marry the dragon that lives down in that smelly lake, and her wedding gift will be that he will eat her. George immediately replied, "If that's the case, I'm going to kill the dragon." Everybody warned him nobody could ever kill this ferocious, plague-breathing lizard. But George was determined. The people tied the princess to a tree by the lake and left her to meet her fate. George saw the dragon come out of the water, and he charged up on his horse, and he flung his spear into its shoulder. The dragon let out a cry. It was wounded, but it was not dead. While it was crying out in pain, George managed to cut the princess free. The dragon was so angry at his attacker. George retreated and called out to the princess to take off her belt from around her waist and to throw it at the dragon. She did this, and by a miracle, the belt wrapped itself around the dragon's neck like a collar. Immediately, the dragon became as peaceful as a lamb, and the princess was able to lead it back to the city. When the people saw the princess and George coming back with the dragon, they were very angry and very afraid, until St. George drew out his sword and cut off the head of the dragon. Then the people knew that they would live a life safe and unharmed. The king and all the people of Cyrene became Christian. 15,000 men were baptized, not counting the women and children. And on the site where the dragon died, the king built a church to the Virgin Mary and to St. George. And from the altar of this church came a fountain of holy water. This water was said to cure any disease. A super saint quality we can learn from St. George is honor. St. George knew what the right thing to do was when he saw the princess about to be eaten by the dragon. He knew that it was the good Christian example. So what does honor look like, and how can we teach it to our children? Honor means to give great value or to highly respect or esteem. Through His Word, God tells us that we are to honor our parents, the old, and those in authority. We are to show honor at work and in our marriages. We are to show honor in school and to our teachers. And St. Peter tells us we are to honor all people. We're even reminded in the first letter of Timothy that the elders and teachers and leaders in our churches deserve double honor. Before we were in lockdown from the virus, I would often ask Moses to come to the store with me. Maybe it would be to buy groceries or fruits and vegetables. I'm pretty sure we can all agree. When you go to the store and you pass by the window that has lots of toys, it can be quite difficult for children. In TIRANÖ, we have lots of stores that try to entice children into making their parents buy toys. There are even guys on the street that sell toys, and they come up to your kids and stick the toys in their faces. They always put all the kids' toys outside of the shops right by the sidewalk. That way, when you walk past with your kids, it's almost guaranteed they will see something that they want. One day, we were walking to the grocery store and Moses saw a toy that he absolutely just had to get. I tried to direct his attention away from the store, talking about something fun that we would do later in the day, but he was relentless. He started to scream that he needed this toy. I was getting a little impatient. I was losing my temper and I was getting embarrassed. I tried to explain that the toys are not strong. They're made of plastic that will break very quickly. Nothing I said helped change his mind. Finally, I just got the toy that he wanted. We brought it home, and I'm not joking you. Less than 2 hours later, the toy was broken. The plastic was too cheaply made, and this was reflected in the very, very low price. Moses was so sad that the toy broke. He was equally as sad that what I said was true. He told me later he realized that I was right. He should have listened and followed my directions. He also said he should have trusted me, his mom. Those 3 things are essential in honoring your parents. Now, whenever we pass by that store with the toys, Moses always remembers that toy he bought that broke the same day, and how he should listen to his parents and trust them. Honoring your mother and father can be as simple as that for kids. Following directions, listening to us without a fight, and trusting us. When our children honor us, they are realizing the importance of our words. Now let us move on to the story of Saint Irene Cristovalantou. It was the year 855. 12 years earlier, Byzantine Emperor Theophilus had died, leaving his son Michael to rule the empire, with his mother, Empress Theodora. Theodora immediately did something we all remember to this day. She brought the veneration of the icons back to the church, which we celebrate each year on the Sunday of Orthodoxy. Now, the baby Michael was a young man, and he ruled the kingdom. His mom had one more thing to do for her son. She wanted to organize a show for him. But this wasn't any show. It was a show for him to find a wife. He invited the most beautiful and virtuous young maidens in the empire, all to Constantinople. One of them was to be chosen to marry the young emperor. 2 beautiful sisters, Irene and Theodosia, traveled from Cappadocia to the bride show. Special messengers from the empress went with them, to guard them, to guide them, and above all, to make sure that they got to Constantinople as quickly as possible. But Irene had other ideas. She knew that close by lived the holy man who would one day be known as Saint Ioannikos the Great. Irene wanted more than anything to receive his blessing, so she begged and she pleaded with the messengers until at last they agreed. They warned her, though, that the holy man only spoke to those whose hearts loved Christ. To the surprise of everyone, Saint Ioannikos welcomed Irene by name and said that the beautiful girl should go to Constantinople as planned. But she should rejoice, for the monastery of Cristovalantou needed her. The impatient messengers hurried Irene and Theodosia off to Constantinople, but they arrived too late. Emperor Michael had already chosen his bride. Theodosia remained in Constantinople and married Bardas, the emperor's uncle. Irene remembered the words of the holy man, and she went to the monastery of Cristovalantou. She saw how beautiful and peaceful life was there, and she begged to be allowed to become a nun. She gave up her beautiful clothes and her jewels. She put on the simple clothes of a nun and began to do humble tasks at the monastery, praying all the time, reading the lives of the saints. Irene never complained that as a noblewoman she was too good for these tasks, but did her work with the love of Christ shining on her face. For 3 years Irene prayed all night long, and prayed all day as she went about her chores. The abbess and the other nuns were amazed at her humility and her kindness, and her love for God. When the old abbess died, she chose Irene to take her place. Irene was so humbled that the other nuns knew she would never accept, so they took her with them to seek the guidance of the patriarch. When they asked him who was to become the next abbess, he said that God had told him it would be Irene. So she became the abbess of the monastery, and she grew in love and she grew in holiness each year. Soon, miracles began to happen around this lovely nun. One night, another nun saw the cypress trees in the courtyard bending down to Saint Irene as she prayed. The nun could not believe her eyes. So she tied a handkerchief to the tip-top branch of the tree. The next morning she showed all the other nuns. The handkerchief was still there on the topmost branch. Nobody could even climb to the top. One of the most famous miracles that happened around Saint Irene was the miracles of the apples. One night, late, Irene was praying alone as she often did when she heard a voice say to her, "A sailor will bring you fruit today. Eat it and rejoice." The abbess wondered, what did this mean? That morning after liturgy, a sailor turned up at the gates of the monastery. From out of his shirt he took out a handkerchief and started to tell this story. As I was passing the island of Patmos, an old man waved to me to stop. It was very windy and there were lots of rocks by him, so I couldn't stop. The wind blew us faster than away from the island. Suddenly, the ship stopped, and when I looked back, the old man was coming to me, walking on the water. He gave me a packet with 3 apples and told me to take them to God's servant, the patriarch, from his servant John, and that the apples came from paradise. Then, Abbess Irene, he took the packet I gave to you, and he handed it to me and said, "Give these 3 apples to the Abbess of Crisovlantu, whose name is Irene. Tell her to eat these in fulfillment of the desire of her soul, because I have brought these from paradise." Then the old man blessed us, gave thanks to God, and began to move again, and he completely disappeared. The sailor bowed down before Abbess Irene, who looked at the apples in wonder. Never had she seen such beautiful fruit. The smell coming from them was like the finest perfume. The only explanation could be that these apples were truly from paradise. After Saint Irene gave thanks to Lord for such a great gift, she fasted for a week. Then she ate the first apple, a bite a day for the next 40 days. During this time she ate no other food, and the apples never went bad. On Great and Holy Thursday, after the nuns had received Holy Communion, she took the second apple out, and she gave a piece to each of the nuns. The third apple she kept taking it out whenever she felt sad, to breathe the beautiful aroma of paradise and feel the comfort and joy it brought in her soul. One day when Irene was an old lady more than 100 years old, an angel appeared to her and told her that the next year at that time she would die. The next year came, and Irene fasted and prayed all week before the angel had told her the day. All she had to do was eat the third apple. Blessing the nuns, Irene gave them some final words and said, "Don't do anything just because you want to do it, but rather do what God wants you to do, for He is your only help at the hour of judgment." When Saint Irene died, a beautiful fragrance came from her grave. In her icon you can see Saint Irene holding 3 apples, and it is still a tradition at the monastery of Crisovlantu on her feast day to bless apples. So what super saint quality can we learn from Saint Irene? She was a very humble woman. Even from the time she was younger, she never boasted about how religious she was or how holy she was. Something we are always working on with Moses is the character trait of humility. Especially now in the time of Great Lent and when we pray the prayer of Saint Ephrem, we speak a lot about humility. Humility is the opposite of pride. To be humble means that we treat other people with respect, dignity, and worth. In being humble, we can also use our words to encourage other people instead of focusing on how good we are. It also means we realize we make mistakes and we ask for forgiveness. Finally, being humble means helping people without being asked. We've been trying to work on one aspect of humility in the last few months. Ever since Ethan has been born, Moses has made a habit of saying how much bigger, stronger, and faster he is than his little brother. Now, in the mind of a 5-year-old, it's kind of difficult to understand that a little 5-month-old baby can't do the same thing as a kid. We're trying to cultivate Moses' positive attitude and help him to be a little more humble in his actions. Instead of bragging that he runs so fast or he's so much stronger than his little brother, we encourage him to say phrases like, "Ethan, if you eat fruits, you can have strong muscles that will help you run fast." Or, "Ethan, when you get to be 5, you will also be this strong." We remind Moses daily that he is an example for his younger brother. This lesson on humility can also be used for school. When Moses first started preschool, and until they closed for the virus, he would often come home annoyed and frustrated that the children in his class didn't listen as well as he did. He would say things like, "Oh, this girl didn't listen, this boy didn't listen, I was such a better student, I know how to be a better listener, and they did all these bad things." Now at 5 years old, I am almost positive he has had moments in school where he has not listened or he did not do all the exercises correctly. But we tried to bring him back to reality and remind him, everyone makes mistakes. We don't need to put other people down to bring ourselves up. He can be a good student without bragging about it, and he can be a good example for those around him. So what super saint qualities do St. George and St. Irene have? Number 1, be honorable. Number 2, have humility. And number 3, when I was growing up and I was a teenager, it was very popular to have these little bracelets that said WWJD. What it stood for was, what would Jesus do? It was a reminder that in everything we do in the day, we need to remember what Jesus would do in that situation. Would he be a good example? Honorable? Humble? Loving? Forgiving? Encourage our children that when they are having a difficult time with their behavior or struggling, or when they are having a good time and they are being successful, what would Jesus do? What would he want us to do? I want to encourage you as a family to memorize the following 2 Bible passages. Write them down, put them in your prayer corner, and say them daily. That way, when our children are faced with any type of difficulties or successes, they will turn to God. Romans chapter 12, verse 10. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 to 5. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. I look forward to our time together next week as we journey through Great Lent, our last week before Holy Week. Let us make a clearing in our lives and the lives of our families to let God shine through. Let us teach our children how to emulate the super saints of our beautiful Orthodox Church. You have listened to the Homemaking Missionary on Radio Ngjallja.